Off to our first opening keynote, which was already mentioned by Jakub. He's the Senior Vice President of Talent Strategy and Innovation. That's a very big job title at Kforce. But what's nice to know, he's also my personal hero when it comes to candidate sourcing. I've learned so much from this particular person, especially by looking at his blog, because under sources and recruiters, he's well known under the name of Boolean Black Belt. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to invite to the stage Mr. Glen Cathey. So here's your clicker.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what do you think are going to be the key takeaways of your story today for the people in the room? Can you reveal a little bit?
I would say I'll go with two.
Right.
One would be that I think semantic search solutions and artificial intelligence are actually a really good way to automate the human algorithm, the things that really good people already do. It's figuring out how to automate that, and then you can replicate that across people who may not have those skills. I'd say that's one of the big takeaways. And the other is that in today's day and age, a lot of recruiters are actually loaded down with a number of requisitions that they have to work on a monthly basis or a weekly basis. And technology is a really good way to enable people to be able to handle a heavy workload and still do the proactive recruitment, which so many recruiters unfortunately can't do if they don't have the right tools because they're focused so much on the inbound.
Okay. Well, looking forward to your talk.
All right. Thank you.
Glen Cathey.
All right. Thanks. All right. So we are going to, well, first I want to say I'm honored to be here. I'm just as excited to see the rest of the program. I looked at the lineup. It was fantastic. So again, thank you very much for inviting me out here to speak on something I'm incredibly passionate about. I wanted to actually set the stage for the challenge because my talk is on how semantic search changes and impacts recruitment. And I think before we jump into that, we have to talk about what are the current challenges that the recruitment industry faces to figure out how semantic search actually addresses those challenges. So if I can start advancing here. All right, so people would probably agree with these quotes. I just like to throw them up because we want to set the stage and say that most executives would tell you that people are their greatest assets, right? Does anybody disagree with such a statement? Okay. This is also one of my favorite quotes too, because I do believe that at the end of the day, you do bet on people. You don't bet on strategies. People create the strategies. People create products. They invent patents. They create solutions. They provide value to people. But if you start off with these premises, right, companies say that people are our greatest asset. There's nothing more important than finding and hiring great people. What I'm seeing today is a shift towards inbound recruitment. This is actually a really good ebook that Indeed put out recently, and it talks about, it focuses heavily on inbound recruiting, which you would expect because it's Indeed, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but if you look at this slide, you'll see something very interesting. It's that line, and this is straight from that ebook. It's obviously, hey, go free inbound, and inbound is basically posting jobs, posting vacancies, and having people come to you, the inbound aspect. And you'll see, well, maybe you try it for free, and it works a lot. Right? In fact, my own company for a while, until I got shut down for staffing agencies, was making a lot of hires for free using inbound. And you'll see then it goes to paid inbound before it even goes out to outbound if needed. And that's what we're going to talk about quite a bit, is the if needed part. And this is an interesting post that came up on LinkedIn the other day that got a lot of traction. I'm not sure if any of you guys saw it. I'm sure that it's got more than 55,000 views now. It's a guy from HomeDepot.com, basically saying the recruiting industry is dead. And obviously we've heard a lot of things that have died over the years, like job boards were going to kill staffing firms and all kinds of things. And of course robots are going to replace us. But in this case, he's talking about the fact that recruitment is dying and that we just need to evolve to digital marketing. And I don't disagree with the fact that digital marketing has to evolve, and inbound recruiting is something that we need to master and get better and better at. But the thing that I like to do to point out is the counterpoint. So if you start looking at any kind of breakdown of the job-seeking status of the average person, whatever the stats you use and depending on your source, the reality is the majority of people are not looking. The minority of people are looking. And so I really like to drive the point home that digital marketing and your inbound recruiting strategies really only work on the minority of the talent pool. And I think that's important. if you care about going back to, Sir Richard Branson and other people saying, well, people are our greatest asset, so what are we doing? Are we focusing on the small minority of the people who happen to be looking? To me, that may not be the best talent acquisition strategy. And there was an article that Lou Adler actually posted online on LinkedIn recently, and he said that the recruiting industry is facing an existential threat, which sounds like a really kind of scary thing, right? But essentially what he's saying is, look, right now we're not in a surplus of talent models, so why are we using that? And if the majority of people are not actively looking to make jobs, why are companies spending so much time trying to focus on the other 10 to 20% that are easy to get? These are things that I think about on a daily basis. So really, an executive might say that people are our greatest asset, and there's nothing more important than finding, hiring, and retaining great people. But the reality is a lot of companies, whether they admit it or not, they're focusing mostly on the low-hanging fruit. So it's essentially going to the orchard and actually stooping down and picking up the apples that have already fallen off the tree. And I'm not saying those aren't bad apples, but the reality is when you think of a fruit tree, and this is something that I think will always stick with me, I've used it in many of my talks, is the fact that there's a lot of fruit that you can't reach that's not on the ground, it's not within arm's reach. In fact, volumetrically, just like the talent pool, there's more people that you have to break a ladder out and actually climb up to get them. But the problem with that is today, many companies load down the recruiters with, I can't say it's an unreasonable amount of recs to work, but sometimes I hear 20, 30, some companies I hear 45 jobs that a single recruiter is responsible for, and really can't blame them for the fact that, well, why are they not relying 100% on inbound? Because they really don't have the time to proactively go out and perform the proactive recruiting, which is the outbound recruiting. And another thing that people like to write about online, and I have nice debates with people, is that, well, aren't there more people that you can find online now than ever before? It's true. You have online resume CV databases for the job boards. You have LinkedIn, unprecedented access to tons of people, Facebook, other social networks. But I always like to have a counterpoint here is that just because you have more access to more people, it doesn't make it any easier to find the right person in that crowd. In fact, I'd argue that the bigger the crowd, the harder it is to find a single person in the crowd, right? So I can't get away from this either. I don't know, I'm guilty of using the haystack analogy all the time. The reality is if the haystack gets bigger, it's not any easier to find the needle in the haystack. And that's what we're getting. Every single day, there's more information available about more people, which makes it seem on the surface like it's easier to find people. But you guys aren't looking just for people. You're not looking for hay. You're looking for specific strands, or in this case, we'll talk about needles. And if you're like me, you actually just want to get a big, giant magnet out and just kind of suck out all the best people of the haystack and be done with it, right? And that's what we're talking about, is how do we automate things like this? Not the manual sifting through the haystack, but actually pulling out all the needles systematically using something like technology. So this is something I also like to drive home, is that the value of data really is, it's zero unless you can retrieve it. And it's not really that valuable unless you can quickly, easily, and precisely retrieve, and when it comes to human capital data like CVs and social profiles, people that have a high probability of being the right match for what you're looking for. Now, I've talked about this before, and I didn't put it in the deck, but I'll just mention it. I feel like I've broken it down to a number of key variables. When you're trying to recruit somebody, you're really trying to predictively control variables like what skills they have, what job they would like to take next, what's the next step in their career, where they would like to work in terms of location, compensation that they're looking for, are they even available? These are things that are all variables that you can apply, and with technology, you can actually start to exert more predictive control over it. So if you're familiar with gambling, it's kind of like counting cards. And if you're really good with data, you can actually count the cards so that you can find fewer people quickly who are more likely to respond to you, be the right match, and hire them. And it's kind of a good scenario. So I had to pull this offline. This was recently posted in a Facebook group. And the guy basically says, how is it possible that about 70% of people in a room full of recruiters have never heard of Boolean? Which is kind of sad, right? I'm sure George Boole is probably rolling over in his grave, right? Father of computer science in many ways, right? But the challenge is that is shocking. I've worked with a lot of people, and if the recruiter doesn't know Boolean, then what kind of searches do you think they're running? Single term searches, one title plus a skill. Incredibly unrefined. too basic. But the reality is it's actually never been about Boolean. Boolean logic just happens to be the easiest way to syntactically put together a query, and a query is just a formal statement of what you need. But the reality is so many recruiters struggle with just basic Boolean, and we're only talking about 3 operators primarily, your ands, your ors, and your nots. It is pretty simple, but it really isn't about the Boolean operators, because I was chatting with someone earlier today before we kicked off the conference. It's not even about the operators. That's just the glue that sticks it together. It's actually more about the words you put between the operators. And then this is another funny thing that I always like to say. It's that all searches work. If I type in a title, it's going to work. It's going to return results. If I type in 3 keywords, the search is going to work. But the question is, how good is the search? How good are the results? And then how quickly can they identify the right match? Which goes back to what I was saying before. The value of the data is directly proportional to how quickly and easily and precisely you can find people who have a high probability of being the right match. I don't think many recruiters actually say it that way. That's what they want. But when they're putting in really basic searches and not even using Boolean logic, they're actually not exerting any predictive control over the qualifications of people. And so I'm going to kick into a video that some of you may have seen. If you haven't, it's going to be a real treat, I hope. This is a brilliant quote by Deming. If you don't follow Deming, I highly recommend that you go start looking at some of his works. This is such a brilliant quote. If you don't know how to ask the right question, you discover nothing. This is so true about data, analytics, reporting, business intelligence, but it's also very relevant when it comes to recruiting, because when you go to a database, that's essentially what you're trying to do, is ask a question. Do you have somebody with these skills, with this experience, who's likely to want the job that I'm thinking of them for, that will probably take the commute and the money will probably be in the range that's acceptable? That's really what you're saying, but if you only put in a title and a keyword, you're really not doing a good job of translating that query into the system. So let's see, I think is a good example of what's really going on for most recruiters today.
Hello, just after semi-skimmed milk.
Your search for semi-skimmed milk returned 0 results.
You don't sell milk?
Your search for milk returned 52,256 results. Your top hit, milk of magnesia.
No.
Milk floats of yesteryear.
No.
This milk-themed family wall planner.
No, sorry, I'm just looking for, normal milk.
Couldn't find what you were looking for.
That's what I'm saying. I couldn't find it, so I'm asking you if you could...
Advanced search.
All right, let's do this. Keyword, now, go.
Yeah, okay. Milk.
Please narrow your search by using one of the following filters. Kayaks, packet 12, self-cleaning, breakfast and condom.
That one. Breakfast.
1 result.
Milk, skimmed semi.
Semi-skimmed milk. That's what I first asked you for.
It's milk skimmed semi.
So that's from Google Analytics. It's right off of YouTube. I thought that was brilliant because many people are running a search, and if it's a literal search and it's not semantic, it only returns exactly what you're looking for. But what if you're looking for is actually not mentioned in the same way? This person's looking for semi-skim milk, and I didn't even know that there was milk skim semi, or you could say it that way. But I like to point out that a lot of recruiters unwittingly are running searches like this, and that's the kind of experience they're having when they run searches in CV databases and even on social networks. And then I like to point this out. This is actually a local search for people that have a title of software engineer and just happen to mention Java. It's a really simple search, 1 title, 1 keyword, and you'll notice this is local to your area. It's got a 50-mile range, so it's kind of ranging out there, but that's 7,000 results. Right? What do you think recruiters do with that? Do they look at all 7,000 results? No, it's impractical. Where do you think they start? They start at the top. Who is at the top? Are the best people at the top? No. Why are the people at the top that are at the top? It's keyword matches. And it's not even semantic. So if they have the title of software engineer, they match. But what about programmer or developer or consultant, things like that? So getting a lot of results, some people are like, yeah, that's great. But the reality is getting a lot of results in many cases actually causes lots of problems for recruiters and they don't realize it. And this is something that I always like to explain to folks. When I train recruiters on how to search, I say, look what you're up against. UGCs, user-generated content. That's one of the primary challenges recruiters face today is the fact that the things you're searching are created by people. And people vary widely, and they have problems when they write their CVs. The best one on here, I think, is the fact that some people believe that a one-page CV is still the best. And here's a really big aha moment for you. If someone with 3 to 5 years of experience, or even more, is trying to limit their experience to one page, what are they doing? Anybody tell me? They're leaving things out. So they're actually doing things and have skills and experience that they're consciously removing, which means you can't search for it anymore. So you might be searching for skills and experience people have. You simply can't retrieve them, but they're there. That's the kind of stuff that drives me crazy all the time, is that I'm worried. I don't really care about the results I get. I'm actually really more concerned about the results I don't get, because some of those people could be better candidates than the ones that are easy to find, right? But the second to last bullet is that most people don't sit down and say, I'm going to create this CV or this social profile for recruiters to find me. Some do, and that's okay. Some do, and they're the ones that you don't want to find. I'm sure if we have staffing folks in the room, you see that. You're like, how does this guy show up in every single one of my searches? Whether it's a software engineer, a project manager, a business analyst, a network engineer, it's like, how does this person do that? It's because they've keyword loaded their resume. So I've talked about this for many years, and I like the concept of dark matter. So I'm not an astronomer, but if you understand dark matter is something that we know theoretically exists, but you can't perceive it directly. When it comes to human capital data, you encounter large volumes of dark matter that you have no clue that it's there. If I run a search for a software engineer, I can't pull up a programmer. Without semantic search, I'm literally excluding that person, and I have no clue that there may be hundreds, sometimes thousands of results available to me, but because I asked the wrong question, or asked a good question, it was too simple. It only returned it like the milk skim semi-skim milk situation. Unbeknownst to a lot of recruiters, every search they run actually excludes people that they won't even know exist. Again, this is something for many years that maybe it's just to think, maybe I'm just different, I don't know. I'm always worried about who am I excluding? Who's good that I can't return with this search so that I could change it? But most people don't think about that. But that's why I like to bring this up, because semantic search is going to put a big fat dent into dark matter. So I've been talking about this for many years, so to combat this, before I had any kind of technology to be able to tackle these things, I tried to classify the different levels of manual text mining, right? Using Boolean or maybe even some extended Boolean, depending on the search engine you're using, to be able to get more value out of human capital data. So level 1 is basic keyword search, software engineering, Java. You saw the kind of results that come up there. Level 2 is conceptual search, and I'll show you some examples with Textkernel actually, and there's many other solutions that show you how to do that. Is if I look for programmer, it's smart enough to know that those are also called software engineers and many other titles. So that's grouping a concept. One word expands to multiple words that mean the same thing, synonymous terms. Number 3, it gets a little tricky. That's implicit search. That's where recruiters have to know that, well, if somebody works here and they're an accountant, they probably have SAP, even if they don't mention SAP on their CV. So I might actually strategically exclude SAP from my search and just look for accountants at that company and call them and ask them, do you have SAP? And 9 times out of 10, they will. So I'm searching for things that imply the right experience that may not be directly represented. And then I'm talking about manual natural language search. I'll show you, I think, a lovely example later in the deck on how you can combine nouns and verbs through proximity just using straight Boolean. And number 5 is indirect search, which is, well, if I'm looking for a software engineer, maybe I want to actually talk to testers because testers work with software engineers. So who can I find quickly that will lead me to the right person, even if the first person I contact isn't my direct target? But the problem with all that is for many years I tried to create more people like me. I wanted to clone me and say, how can I create all these other awesome search experts? And I think probably less than 5% of the time I've been successful. So the reality is I can't clone me. There's a few people that get this kind of stuff and they get really excited about it and it really makes them more productive. So I know we have a lot of staffing folks. I used an old Lotus Notes-based CPAS database early in my career, and by my 4th month, I was averaging 8 placements in an IT staffing agency, 8 placements per month consistently. So that was very high. In fact, it was record-setting at my company. And I tell people that only to say, the only reason why I could do that is I got really good with data. I got really good queries. I could find people in our database of 80,000 CVs or so that other people couldn't find, but they were there. It's like being a good fisherman. We all have access to the same ocean, but some of us catch more fish. Sometimes you just can't teach everybody to be an awesome fisherman. So that's where we start to get into technology. So obviously the desire is you want systems to know what you mean. And this is a brilliant quote from someone who definitely knows what they're talking about when it comes to search. I love this. And it's like we're trying to move away from give me what I said, right? That's the milk, semi-skim milk, to give me what I want. Even if it's called milk skim semi, you know what I want. It needs to understand what I'm looking for. So when you are using a semantic search solution, such as Textkernels, I wanted to break down what I think are the primary impacts, positive impacts to recruitment today on what it does. And I'd say the number one is definitely the automation of it's like the automation of the human algorithm. So you realize a really good person who's got really good sourcing skills, when they sit down, they talk to the hiring manager, they get the requirements, they can translate the requirements in their brain, and they can translate that into a query into the system that the system understands that returns really good results, very precise results that people are highly probable. I mean, in many cases, you can sit down with someone who's really good at this and they run a search, and within the first 5 calls, they're finding the best candidate. That's not replicable from person to person. That's kind of the art. I've tried to turn it into a science, and some people pick it up. But the reality is we should leverage technology to figure out how do we take the human algorithm and automate it so we don't have to have a whole bunch of search experts. Some people are very good at the recruitment aspect, the human element, and we shouldn't expect everybody to be a search expert. Increased inclusion is a huge thing. What I mean by inclusion, it ties into the next detail, which is the exploitation and exploration of dark matter. So if I didn't do a good job of explaining it before, anytime I'm looking for something, if I don't explicitly ask for it, let's say I'm looking for a business analyst. I type in the title business analyst. I'm actually excluding people with the title business systems analyst or requirements analyst or just functional analyst. Because my query didn't ask for it, I can't retrieve people who don't say it. And I call that dark matter because it gets excluded. But with semantic search, if it knows that a business analyst is the same thing as a business systems analyst or requirements analyst or a functional analyst, it starts to include more people, and inclusion is very important when it comes to search. And that also allows you to start digging into the dark matter results that previously were excluded and you had no idea were there, and it starts to surface them for the user without them having to even be aware that it was there in the first place. And then speed of relevant candidate identification is not something that can be understated. And I'll show you a graph in a second. But first I wanted to show you something because we have implemented Textkernel. If you look at this search, it's 3 words, right? But each word has a number of synonyms, 17, 20, 40. So essentially, a user could type in 3 queries. And I apologize if there's non-IT recruiters in here. It doesn't matter what the terms are, really. It's the fact that a user can say, well, I need people with these skills. Well, that 3-word query becomes over 70-term query, which is what, if you look at some of the searches that the recruiters that I train have, they're giant Boolean search strings with these giant OR statements of 20 and 40 and 17 terms. This essentially automates that, and no one ever has to do that again. So what if somebody doesn't know all 40 terms that are related to cloud? They don't have to. That's the brilliance of semantic search. It understands what cloud means, whether the person says cloud or not. And I think I have, so it pulls out. And I talk about this in a moment, about the fact that it starts to give people more insight. It's like, well, I love a white box semantic search solutions, which Textkernel is. There's some really good semantic search solutions on the market today that are more what I call black box, which it doesn't tell you what it's thinking. It just, you type a keyword and you get what you get and you have to trust it. I love being able to look at it and saying, well, what do you think is synonymous with Hadoop? And I may agree or disagree, and I can start to provide feedback, which is incredibly powerful part of search today. Is it's not just press a button, get results, go. It's press a button, what's coming back and why, and is there something I can do to intelligently change the results to make it more relevant to me? And so when I talk about inclusion and semantic search, is that you want systems to know what sales means. What does a substation mean? If I look for a substation engineer, what are all the terms that mean that someone might have substation experience, or Hadoop? Or what if I'm looking for a top performer? What does a top performer mean? Well, you can start building out these synonym lists for semantic search so that a recruiter only has to type in sales top performer. And you get people with sales experience regardless of their title. You get top performers regardless of how they talk about being a top performer. So again, 2 words can easily become a 50-word query, which is a huge, huge benefit for recruiters. And the speed of identification, I'm not exaggerating. I've sat down my own, I've kind of timed myself. I've worked with some people that I've trained that are really good. When you're working with a good database that has semantic search technology, you can identify at least a person a minute. And if you compare that to posting a job or asking for referrals, it's not a matter of do you get people, it's do you get people who are closely matched. And when you search for people, you have a control over those variables. And if I can find up to a person a minute, or even if I'm only half as good as that, if I can find a person every 2 minutes, if I can source 30 people in an hour that are closely matched, that is a huge impact of semantic search on productivity per associate, which is something anybody in the recruitment industry wants to be able to impact positively. So the final things I want to talk about here is that if you are using a white box solution when it comes to semantic search, the recruiters can learn. So if I have a new recruiter that's new to IT and they say, well, I don't even know what Hadoop is, if I go back a couple slides, you open up and you can say, oh, well, HDFS is Hadoop, Pig is Hadoop, Hive is Hadoop, MapReduce is Hadoop. It actually tells you, by the way, you search for Hadoop, but Hadoop is related to all these other technologies. So recruiters actually learn along the way. It again kind of brings to the surface what the average recruiter would have to do by looking at hundreds of resumes and trying to do the pattern recognition manually. So big impact there. Obviously, we don't need to have search experts. And again, I used to be for many years the guy who wanted to convert all recruiters into search experts, and I realized that's an exercise in futility. It's not going to happen. Maybe 10% of all people that are in recruiting really have the propensity, the interest, and the passion, and the capability to get really good at search. We shouldn't expect them to be that. Let's use people to do what they're good at, which is the people element, the human element of recruiting. The engagement aspect, the relationship building, the understanding what's next in your career. That's what the people should be doing more, and they can rely on technology to surface people where they can have more of those conversations with on a daily basis. And probably one of the most important things is that when you have a heavy rec load and you're posting your vacancies and you're dealing with all of your applicants, and many of them are not qualified, when you have a good semantic search technology solution, that enables you to perform that outbound recruiting in a very short period of time. It doesn't take you 8 hours to find 30 people. In fact, sometimes it can take you 30 minutes to find 20 people to call. 20 well-matched people, not just applicants who may or may not be qualified. So this is a man I love to quote. For those who don't know, he used to be the former data scientist and head of query understanding at LinkedIn, which is a pretty interesting title, right? But he basically says, look, search engines really can't figure out what you're looking for in a single search, and that's something that I want to make everyone aware of. I'm going to start talking a little bit about where I think the future of semantic search needs to go in the near term. We need to use our brains because there's a big difference between related and relevant. And the name is actually on there, but I wanted to show a really interesting, it's like a word cloud. So if I'm a recruiter, I'm looking for C#, and you look at this word cloud, and if you've done IT recruitment, you know that all of these words are related to C#. It's fair. But if I'm looking for a C# developer, who's to say that WPF or even WCF are even relevant to what I'm looking for? What if that's not even a requirement? I don't want the search engine to start saying, well, I see people that have all these other things in it. Say, yeah, but it's great that it's related, but it's not relevant to me. And that's where I sometimes I just have to go back to the dictionary. If you look at the second definition of relevance, it's the ability, and this is straight out of Webster's dictionary, the ability as of an information retrieval system to retrieve material that satisfies the needs of the user. People creating these systems need to think it's not just so much about related terms, it's also about what's relevant. But if you don't have a feedback mechanism, you really can't have the user tell the system, hey, I like your results, but they're not really relevant to me. You have to have some kind of interaction with the systems, which ties me into the future. So what do I think needs to come next when it comes to semantic search to even accelerate some of the benefits I've been talking about, how it positively impacts recruitment today? So one of them is this concept that I stumbled across years ago, and hopefully I'm going to pronounce his name right, Gary Marcionini. He talks about this HCIR. So it's human computer information retrieval, and his whole point is that you have to involve humans in the process. And it's not just because we don't want to be fully automated and lose jobs, and I don't think we will be losing jobs. I think it's just going to evolve our industry. But he makes a brilliant point, is that the user has to expend some mental energy in participating with the give and take and the dialogue that Jakub was talking about. So you have to have a dialogue with systems and say, well, here's what I want. And the system should say, well, here's what I think you said. And then you should be able to say, well, that's not exactly what I said. Let's refine the search. That's a much better interaction than what most recruiters do today, which is put in a couple of keywords and they literally just go right into the results. They're not asking, why am I getting these results? Why are there some false positives? How can I improve this search? Just jump in. So it needs to be an input mechanism where people can actually be responsible for, expending some cognitive energy and taking responsibility for the results, because it is just a machine and it's trying to understand your query. So if you were looking for, and again, I apologize if you're not in IT recruitment, that's what I've been doing all my life, so the examples make sense to me. The reality is, whatever the keywords are for the types of things you recruit, if you look at a CV result like this, you can kind of say, well, this person probably could be a good match, right? And it's not just because they're a bunch of highlighted keywords, it's that they're actually relevant keywords. So you're like, this person is doing a lot of work with EMC storage area networking. What I want to see come next from semantic search is something like this. And I've been using this example for years because this is an actual candidate that I recruited. So if you compare the number of keyword hits on the previous slide with the number of keyword hits on this slide, there's only 2. But if everybody wants to just take a quick second and just read that first sentence. What does that tell you? What does that say about that person? It's very good, right? This goes back to the user-generated content issue. Some people explain their experience this way, and they don't necessarily have to barf out a bunch of keywords like this to look really good with the technology. They may mention it once or twice, and they may be 10 times better than the previous candidate. What I want to highlight there, of course, is this part. So if I'm designing solutions with this product line for the largest network in the world, I'm going to be using all the technologies that were on the previous person's CV, but I may not be explicitly mentioning it because maybe it didn't even occur to me to put it on there. And I don't want to use a system that excludes someone this to the dark matter where I'll never return them. Because as soon as I type in a keyword like SRDF or VBlock, this person can't come up because they simply don't even mention the term. Yet this is probably one of the best candidates that you could potentially recruit for this position. So I want systems to start to understand beyond the keyword match and look at the grammatical aspect of what does it mean to work on the largest network in the world. As humans, we immediately figure that out. But machines right now have a hard time figuring that out. And I think that's one of the next frontiers that people need to move into. And it might be small and you might have a hard time, and I was going to have fun with this example. Can you guys tell me what types of things this product development engineer is actually engineering? So right now your human algorithms are running. We got some pharmaceutical. Are we going to have a winner in here? So I'll tell you what I jump into. So let's just look at what are they doing. So, okay, implants, bone screws, pelvic fixation things. What do you think those are? The medical devices, right? I want solutions to be able to automatically read that and say this person doesn't say the word medical device anywhere on their LinkedIn profile. But I want it to automatically say, I see these words, this person is designing medical devices. So recruiters don't have to read this and say, bone screws, oh, that must be a medical device. This is a very good candidate that if you type in medical device, this person doesn't come up. You can't find them. They're in the dark matter world. This is something I'm really excited about, is searching for nouns and verbs. I want semantic search solutions to move into the territory of going to true, powerful sentence-level semantics, because hiring managers are looking for people that do things, that have responsibilities, not just bags of keywords with titles and here's the skills that I have. So in this case, I'm going to call this a natural language query, but you can perform this in some databases today. I'm going to do a Boolean to English translation. Can you find me somebody who has implemented or configured SAP sales and distribution module? That's what I want. That's my query. I have to type it like this, and then I get results like this. That was on purpose, right, for dramatic effect. If you read the sentences, you can see that it worked brilliantly. It's finding people who says, I have been responsible for configuring and implementing SAP SD. It doesn't get more relevant than that. That's what I need. And I simply said, well, what do they do? Well, they need to be configuring or implementing. Well, configuring and implementing what? Well, SAP's SD module. So that's semantic search you can actually do manually today, and I'd love to see more automation of noun-verb combinations, because that's finding people what they do, not just words they mention on their CV. And winding down here is natural language queries, and I think we're going to hear more about that today, and I know that's something that Textkernel is working on. I had the honor and privileges of having some pretty good access to Watson's analytics, and if anybody's seen that, you can use natural language queries. So that's actually my account with some data, and I typed in, what is the relationship between profits and discounts? And Watson immediately said, well, you know what? Most relevant is how do the values of profit and discount compare? It immediately understood my natural language query and said, well, what do you think about these other queries? Is this what you meant? Which is a dialogue. I was really sad to see this go. Does anybody remember Facebook graph search? You had to use US English, but you could do that anywhere, and you could literally type in German speakers who live near Amsterdam that are software engineers. And you could say, who speak French? And you could just type in natural language query like that. And even better, I got excited because I'm a mobile phone. I could just literally click the microphone and I could say that query, and it understood what I was looking for. And it found me German-speaking software engineers that worked at Google and lived near a place. It understood those things. So I'd like to see more of that. In fact, one of my dream scenarios, if you guys are familiar with Iron Man, is I'd love to have a Jarvis type of heads-up display where I could just say, find me Hadoop engineers that live near here that speak this language and are tinkering around with Mahout, whatever it is, right? So that's my dream. But until we get there, I think that we're moving into the realm of self-service business intelligence, if people are familiar with that. It's basically getting the average business user the ability to dive into things, and instead of using a really poor interface, and Excel is very powerful. I don't know when Excel will ever go away, if it will ever die, because it's very powerful, but that's like your straight Boolean search interface. If you're familiar with self-service business intelligence platforms like a Tableau, this is the future of how we're going to explore data, and I'd like to see more interfaces move in this direction when it comes to semantic search for exploring CV databases. If you haven't played around with Tableau, you can download it for free. It's fabulous. And then last but certainly not least is this is a glimpse of what I believe the future will bring. I took this Karmosphere this diagram, and I said, here's how we could apply big data, analytics, and semantic search, and what I think the future will be. There will be a lot of automation, and it will change some of the roles, and I think that we'll have sourcers or sourcing recruiters that are wielding these systems and using the data and saying, you know what, we're going to build pools of people that hiring managers can dip into directly to do self-service. Because if you were to tell your sourcer, your data analyst, you know, put together a group of people that fit these types of skills that work for these companies, and that person will get the data and put it together, and then recruiters and hiring managers can go right into that collection, into that talent pool, and start to leverage it. And I honestly do believe, and I hope this is part of the future where we go, and it's all actually empowered by technology and, of course, data, which continues to grow every day. So that kind of wraps up my presentation, a little glimpse of the future. Just, I guess, two main takeaways is that right now, semantic search, I think, is the two main impacts is the fact that it automates what really good sourcers do that most recruiters can't do. And in fact, I don't think we should be able to expect them to become search wizards. But it really drastically increases their performance, and that's a huge thing. And that goes back to the fact that if you're still going to work in an environment where a company says, I need you to work 20, 30, 45 open requisitions at a time, you really do need technology that makes it simpler for you to quickly identify people who are going to be a good match. Most importantly, in the deep end of the talent pool that inbound recruiting will never bring you. And if you're going to say, if your executives are going to say talent is your number one priority, you can't only be fishing in the pool of inbound recruiting of the people who come to you. It's only the minority. And as we all know, some of the best people are already employed somewhere else doing a good job. And we have to have tools that enable people to go out and take the time to go find them, to fish in the deep end. There you go.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Glen Cathey. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is there anybody with an urgent question for Glen that he wants to ask him? Otherwise, I have one.
I see Bill. Bill's...
Where's Bill?
I know Bill's going to hit me with one.
I'm keeping this.
Thank you. Quick question for you, Glen. I've got a belief that there's a talent tipping point that companies are reaching, which is when they're connected with enough people that they have enough data in their wide network, maybe their LinkedIn followers, all the rest of it, to be able to find everyone they want. First of all, do you believe that? And secondly, how do you actually source from the data that you have rather than external data?
Well, it kind of goes back to that last slide, is I believe that you have the opportunity to go out there and source and then create a, whether you call it a talent community or a data lake, if you were to use a more technical term. Even within that, you just basically you're putting fish in a particular area and then you fish within that area. I think there are some companies that are already in that situation. I know to some extent even our company is that way because that's the vision we're trying to do. The reality is, though, I think you always have to be worried about who you don't know because you never know everybody. But here's the brilliant part about the data that you do have access to. If you just have 1,000 people of a particular type or multiple types, having good access to those people allows you to access their network, which goes back to the human element. And to me, the technology aspect is how can you quickly identify people who might not only be the right match, but also have a high probability of knowing other people are the right match. So let our people get in touch with them, develop a relationship, and start networking. And that takes 1,000 people, and that could turn into 8,000 people that you may not even have a digital footprint for. So that's another way of looking at the data is it's not just the data and the pool that you have, it's the access that those people give you if it's leveraged properly, just with the human element. It actually makes it easier, right? So if I'm relocating some fish from the Pacific Ocean and I put them into this pond, it becomes much easier to fish in that pond. But even then, it's still coming down to sorting intelligently who is the person who has the highest probability of being the right match for this particular position. And not just being the right match, but someone who, regardless of their situation, would say, you know what, that's something that would interest me, because that's something people forget about. Just because of the CV matches and their experience matches, it doesn't mean they'd be interested in doing your job. There's 2 big variables there. Are they qualified? Would they be interested? And that's something you can start to control with data, but it makes it a lot easier if you've looked at the known universe of people and you've done your best job of collating them into one place, and it makes your job a lot easier to fish in a pond than it is in the ocean, as long as you have a process by which you're still going out to the ocean and making sure that your pond is well stocked. Yeah.
Okay. Well, given the time, are you available for questions later on in the day?
Absolutely.
So Glen is around for the shy people who don't want to ask questions in a big room. He's around to ask them questions. So a big hand again for Glen Cathey, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks.